Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. On our final podcast of the year, we have got a fantastic gang waiting to talk about our review of the year. But before we get into that, I just wanted to do this little thing on my own just to say thank you so much, everyone, for listening and viewing the podcast over the space of, we've been going now 18 months, but particularly this year when we've had a massive increase in people listening and watching us, as we've done nearly 70 episodes this year. So as I produce it and edit it, it's been an absolute joy to meet so many of you, whether that was at conference, people who are listening, or some of the fantastic guests we've had on, from Ed Davey and Mark Pack, right the way up to Alistair Carmichael, Wendy Chamberlain, Naomi Long and Stephen Farry in Northern Ireland, Kirsty Williams from Wales. It's just been an absolutely brilliant podcast. And also the people who you've never heard of, our latest counsellor, the lawyers within the Lib Dem who do their fantastic work in the legal profession, the organisers, both young and old, people who are part of our fantastic groups that advocate for particular issues. It's all been absolutely amazing. And been, for me, one of the highlights of this very troublesome year is getting to know some of you who have been listening and watching, but also some of the gang. I have to pay tribute to the regulars like Richard, who's been on from the very start, people I already knew like Lisa and Tom, but also people I'd never met before I started this podcast like Josh and Laura, who have just been completely wonderful to work with and be a part of on this journey on the Lib Dem podcast. So do enjoy these episodes, or episode, depending on how much we talk for, all about our review of the year. We're recording it on the 30th, so the Brexit vote has just gone through. So because we tried to keep this back so we could get all the news from today, and given that Lancashire's just gone into tier 4, I've got nothing else to do from midnight tonight anyway, so I might as well do more podcasts. But I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. We look forward to loads more episodes in the new year. Have a good New Year's Eve and enjoy these fantastic podcasts. Thank you. Now on with the pod.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast.
That is true. Election of the Lib Dem leader is missing.
And I thought probably, in terms of a Lib Dem podcast, that was probably newsworthy.
Does anyone remember what month it was? Right, the team is here. We've collected nearly everyone. We've got slight childcare issues with Laura, but she is coming. So at some point you'll see a sixth face will pop onto the screen. Or if you're listening to us as a podcast, another random voice will appear from someone. We'll all go, yay! But Laura is on her way. But join us, as you can see on screen. We have Lisa from Stockport, as well as Tom from Stockport. Sir Richard Kemp, as he obviously must soon be called at some point. And Hannah has joined us, so we brought up the Yorkshire quota to make it in line with the Northwest. Welcome, everyone. Right, review of the year. We've got to start, in January. And actually, when I was going through the research to this, I had completely forgot about those Australian bushfires, how bad that was at the start. And that, I don't know if anyone remembers that photo, which is basically a kangaroo with just a burnt out house, right? It was one of the most powerful images. And to be honest, I honestly thought environmental issues might be the big thing of 2020 because it came up lots in the general, but then it just kind of petered away because everything became COVID. Now, do we think environmental issues are going to come back, or do we think COVID's given people an excuse to think, environment's going to take second place to a recovery? What are your thoughts, Lisa?
I don't think the environmental issues are going anywhere, are they? We saw the fires in California and across North America. We've seen increased flooding. If you listen to scientists, things aren't just going to get better by themselves. We need to take action for them to stop getting worse quite quickly. They're not going anywhere. And I think one of the things that the very visible evidence has done is maybe made some people who were a bit skeptical a bit more accepting that climate change is real. It is an emergency. We do need to take action. So very bad things happened, but if the outcome is that more people think we need to do something about it, then some good can come from it.
I mean, are we doing anything about it though? That's the question I mean, going back to local kind of, you don't want to talk about planning and incinerators and stuff like that, but it's interesting because Lancashire is about to sign contracts that will deal with incineration going on for decades beyond 2030. So are we actually doing anything about it, or is it we're just pushing it to one side? I mean, Richard, you've been around a long time. What is actually happening in Liverpool about dealing with this?
Well, I'm quite disappointed, really, because in March, April, May, when we were all doing things very differently, I was getting quite optimistic that green issues were coming up the agenda. People were buying bikes. They were walking around the park in greater numbers than I've ever seen. They were talking much more about permanently wanting to be able to walk to local shops, to local facilities. They rediscovered the fact we've got some cracking parks around here. And some of that is still there. I don't think the council in Liverpool or the government took advantage of what people were saying and doing at that time. I think there is a greater understanding now of green issues, but we've got to, this is very inappropriate given your introduction, we've got to relight the fires under the conversation here, get it moving again. I think we will find green issues more receptive on the doorstep, if we're ever allowed to go back to the doorstep, or in our campaigning that we have done before. It's not as good as it might have been.
Hannah?
I think in some ways this year presents an opportunity in terms of tackling green issues and climate issues, because when things have been destroyed in the way that they have been to some extent, with the COVID crisis, and think about our town centres and the way that people work, the way that people travel to work, and the way that people use their cars and use public transport. When you're trying to build something back up, you've got an opportunity to build it back up in a slightly different way, and to take notice of those green issues in doing that. I mean, that perhaps doesn't sort of tackle the bigger questions about climate change and the climate disasters that we're seeing in places like Australia and California. But, on a more local level, I saw a report recently that said that in Barnsley, which is where I am, that over lockdown, air pollution had actually worsened over the COVID crisis, which is astounding, really, and shouldn't be happening. The problem that we face here in Barnsley is that the leader of Barnsley Council generally treats climate issues like some kind of bourgeois middle class triviality. That's that we Liberal Democrats use as a distraction from the real problems of the fall of the coal mining industry, and so on. And whenever we kind of raise it, because we have called to the council to declare a climate emergency, and we do bash on quite a lot about active travel and so on and so forth, it's sort of quite summarily dismissed. Well, talk about a climate emergency, we've got a poverty emergency here in Barnsley. So so I do think that local authorities have a massive responsibility in what they're doing and how they respond to this. And I still think that for some leaders of big principal authorities, they're just not treating it as a priority. And that's a worry when we've got this opportunity that they're not willing to embrace that. They'd rather go back to reopening the mines.
Yeah, and welcome. Laura has joined us. So just before I bring Tom in, we're still on the first topic, Laura, we're still in January, which is about the Australian fires that had happened and whether climate change has been pushed off the agenda. And it is because again, I shared it with Richard this view that I thought, okay, maybe we're not going to have to travel. Maybe people will work from home more. Maybe this digital kind of revolution can help the green revolution within Britain. But it just feels like we haven't embraced it. We've missed this opportunity. And I suppose one of the indications I get most is the day the Pfizer vaccine came out, shares in Zoom plummeted. So maybe that's an indication of that fact is we're just waiting for normality. But where we're going to go with this, Tom?
So I think there are two things here. Everything that Hannah said is just kind of stolen my thunder, actually, because everything she said is absolutely spot on. I don't think we've missed the opportunity, because if we've missed the opportunity, it's our fault. Like that's, we're all involved in politics, and we're all involved in local authorities, and we have the ability to frame an agenda, either be it from the opposition benches, or hopefully some of us will be in the front benches soon. But I think so that firstly that it's up to us to make that happen. But I think what we're going to do is, as going through the list of the stuff that we're going to be talking about that's happened this year, is I think there is a real excuse for the establishment to kind of say, well, COVID's kind of changed that. Because there's a load of things. So I was going through this list of stuff that happened in January and February. I was like, oh my word, this was stuff that could have changed. We could have changed like the way we dealt with things around not just the environment, around social media, around race equality. There are all these things, but it's really important that we do not lose sight of this. And actually, I think COVID did change the way we look at green spaces a lot. Now, I'm relatively lucky. I live in a house, and if more than likely Carla gets frustrated with me or bored of me, I can be sent to another room and locked in there. But there are several of my friends who live in inner city Manchester who have like a 1-bedroom flat, and prior to the pandemic, it was a really good place for them to be, because they were just walking distance away from bars, restaurants. They had a really good kind of style of life that they wanted. But then when the lockdown happened, they felt really trapped, and so actually, kind of green spaces and parks was it was giving them the ability to kind of get out, and it was a big part of their wellness. Now, I think our relationship with park space has completely changed. And I think local authorities have picked up on that and can use that. And it gives us more of a power, more of a say on how we're going to be using open spaces in the future, and putting pressure on developers, planners, architects to start thinking about how they're placemaking, how they're incorporating that. And I think that's a route forward for us, certainly.
And Laura, you can finish us off, if you like, on this about what happens next with the green agenda. I take it you believe, like everyone else here, that it has to come back and we have to be at the front of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I'm I'm joining late, so I don't know what you've really spoken about so far. But I do think that I don't think we can just assume that everything's just going to go back to normal. I think some people will definitely be pushing in that direction. And I think it's up to us to be championing alternatives. And I think actually for the areas where a lot of us live, I think it offers, a real opportunity. So, thinking about Sheffield, where I live, what I've been doing basically, because my industry doesn't really exist here, what I've been doing basically since we moved to Sheffield is that I've been weekly commuting to London. So I've been working 2 days a week in London and sort of 3 days a week from home, 3 days a week from home, 2 days a week in London kind of thing. And I can imagine that actually, I really like that pattern. It's been, it's tiring. I spend a reasonable chunk of time on the train, but actually it's probably a normal length commute, but just compressed into 2 days rather than 5. And it's enabled me to live in an absolutely incredible place where we have, the Peak District is a fantastic city. We've been really happy here, but actually it was, quite an unusual choice over the last few years. But I can imagine that working patterns like that will become a lot more common as people want to get back to the office, but also, want that extra flexibility that we've all enjoyed about being able to work from home, those of us that are in the fortunate position of being able to. And I do think that could offer a real opportunity. We've talked before on the podcast about the kind of quote unquote levelling up agenda and sort of how we do sort of spread some of the benefits of the the economy around the country more evenly. And, one of the ways I think we can do that is by enabling people to work where they want to. And that will also have climate benefits because people won't be commuting as much. They'll be spending money more locally. They'll be doing things on foot. And it will mean more working over Zoom. And sort of once you start working remotely as well, you start asking questions like, do I really have to get on that flight? And I've seen, we've seen in the aid industry, a huge cutback in travel, like enormous cutback in travel. And when you think about the kind of carbon footprint of most aid workers, it's terrifying because people are sort of flying off to, the obvious things like responses, but also like meetings. And we've realized more and more that we don't have to do that. And so I think there is an opportunity still to kind of bank some of those gains. And it will be partly about promoting the green agenda as such, but also about promoting people's ability to make choices and the workplace bargaining that people are doing. So, people generally don't want to get on dozens of flights a year because it's really tiring and airports suck. But actually kind of supporting people in those choices, I think will be, it will be about supporting those collectives of lots of individual small choices that can actually add up to quite a lot. And is that going to solve the problem? Well, no, because it's systematic. There's the contribution of business, there's sort of the shift toward, there's so much that we need to do, but actually I think we can start to make a dent by doing all of that.
This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2, so why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast.
I think we've got to find a way of helping people who want to change do it properly, and that's our job as politicians. So we've, for example, got a motion down to the next council meeting in Liverpool on the 20th of January, saying we need to do two things, which are the opposite sides of a coin. We need to rethink what a city centre is for, because that's going to be different. And we need to think what our district centres are going to be for, because they'll be different as well. So if we get those things right and talk about the connectivity between them, for example, in Liverpool, it's very easy to get into Liverpool city centre, very difficult to go from district centre to district centre. So if we think these things through, we can capture the spirit. But otherwise, if we don't show leadership, I think Tom was right, it'll all shrivel and die because it'll get too difficult and we'd have liked to have done it. So it's our job to seize the initiative on behalf of people.
And here's a question I pose to all of you. We're all more or less involved in council work. And Laura, although you're not elected, obviously you have a big say in all this. Okay, it looks like the government is going to loosen up council tax restrictions. Should councils put up council tax to pay for green initiatives? It's a risky one because no one likes paying more tax.
So one of the things that happened when the elections were postponed from this May is that an experiment was not allowed to happen. So in Warwick District Council, which is in no overall control, they were looking to put to a referendum, because if a council wants to raise council tax above the limit at the moment I think is 1.99%, it has to go to a referendum of the voters, of the public. And they were wanting to raise it, and I can't remember the numbers and I'm going to get them wrong, but substantially, say 30%, for all of that money to go towards addressing the climate emergency. The elections were postponed, and so that referendum was never allowed to happen because there were no elections. But it would have been a really interesting experiment to see how much appetite there was in Warwick District Council area for real action, real money being raised, real taxes being raised to pay to address the climate emergency. So that's one of the reasons I'm sad the elections didn't happen in May.
Well, I don't think
the Greens do that.
I don't think it would have been a positive result. There have actually been 5 referendums on increasing council tax, and they've all failed. I'm afraid we won't be looking at how we set the council tax in Liverpool. But what we can do is how to preserve what we're already doing. We're down now to just 1.9 billion pounds, million pounds rather, not 1.9 billion fined. The question that we have, because the council tax is such an unfair system, in which you can live in a mansion in Westminster and pay less council tax than someone in an A category, very small terrace in Liverpool, whether or not we will put up council tax by the amount that we're allowed to, which is actually 5% this time, 3% being an adult social care precinct, which we can put up in 2 years. So we have to ask ourselves, how long can we go on taxing the very poor to provide services for the extremely poor? Where's the equity? Where's the fairness in doing that? So I think there's a more philosophical question. The idea of levying a council tax at the moment, just to do new things that we want to do, I suspect for most of us, it would be marvellous, highly unlikely.
I don't think it's a priority for local authorities at the moment, John. I think, and I suspect it's not a priority for the public. I think, with the loss to local authorities in terms of income, and sort of support coming in from the government, I think I think a lot of local authorities have got books to balance in terms of, as Richard says, just carrying on doing, providing the essential services that they're providing. I think, whether council tax needs to go up is a different question, but I think in terms of raising council tax to fund green initiatives, I suspect politically there's absolutely no appetite for that at the moment at all.
I think what the government is going to do, and it's what they did on social care, is they're going to allow councils to raise council tax, because let's face it, a lot of us are on our opposition councillor briefings from the LGA. How many councillors said, look, we've got 2 years left before our reserves run out? And the government, because the government's not stupid, they know if a council raises council tax, the council gets blamed, not the government. So it's a very easy way for them to bridge that gap in funding. But we will move on. We'll move on from that, because other things that happened in January, just very quickly, these ones. So things that also happened in January is Trump got impeached unsuccessfully, but he got impeached. The US killed Iranian general, I want to get this one, Soleimani, that's the one, that it was. So, and remember what a big deal that was at the time? That was like, what are we looking at, like a massive US Iranian kind of foreign intervention was happening at the time. Also, obviously huge, the first evidence of human-to-human transition in Wuhan took place of COVID. So this was the start of the whole COVID process. And it seems so long ago to think of that. That happened in January the 20th, and when that first got released. And obviously, the big event that happened in January, and we're going to cover Brexit in this episode because we've waited for the Brexit vote to happen, but obviously we left the EU on the 31st of January. But then that takes us into February. Of course, it carries on our talk about things, because we had Storm Cara and Storm Dennis battering the country. I mean, some areas were really badly hit. Of less importance to most people was that Meghan and Harry left the royal family. Although I will say, on every news website about key events of the year, Meghan and Harry leaving was in there on every single. It didn't matter if it was Vogue to the Times. It didn't matter. It was all in there. The cabinet reshuffle happened, in terms of Javid got booted out, and Boris really cemented his kind of it's Brexit or get out kind of cabinet. Priti Patel bullying claims. Again, on the same day, and we've seen this a bit right here today, on the same day that Sir Philip Rutnam resigned, Priti Patel was accused of bullying, Johnson announces that his fiancée at the time was pregnant. Does it ring true today? The fact that we've had a COVID vaccine announcement the same day as the EU vote in Parliament, or am I being cynical? We'll see.
Johnson's fiancée pregnant again? I'm not quite sure I understood that, John.
Well, I don't know how many children he's had. I think NASA's still working it out. But anyway, his latest woman got pregnant at that time. We had the first death in February.
To be fair, John, we don't know that she's his latest.
No, that is true. Yeah, I don't want to get... Wow.
Do you know that we don't, Laura? I think this needs a greater explanation.
But
I don't think I know anything that anyone doesn't. I'm just observing the career of Boris Johnson.
And one thing I want to talk a little bit about social media, because it has prompted. And if anyone remembers the death of Caroline Flack, in the suicide of Caroline Flack in February, it really prompted a lot of calls about social media regulation and how's that going, particularly in the light of particularly nastiness within the UK general election and Brexit process. People were feeling very tribal. Do we ever think there will be any sort of kind of regulation on social media? Do we want that as Liberals? So let's go to Tom first. So Hannah can't steal your thunder. This is
So I believe that it needs to be regulated, and this idea that it would be a kind of a block on freedom of speech, so I just don't buy it at all. Like our news channels, our television channels, our newspapers, they all have a regulator of some sort, and for social media, the social media giants, quote unquote, to not have that is it's simply not on. And actually that was the thing that stood out here, is that the suicide of Caroline Flack, just watching that whole thing, it was just heartbreaking. And what's more is, so the media reported that extensively, but this happens every day, that particularly young people are, there has been the kind of the social media generation who are now, this Generation Z, they're, in that community, suicides are up, self-harming is up, self-abuse is up, kind of eating disorders is up. It's absolutely horrific, and it all swirls around the relationship we have with social media and our iPads and our phones. So there needs to be regulation on it. There absolutely needs to be regulation. And that's even before we start to talk about the threat it has to democratic way of life. So yeah, that's my
and a little plug, Tom, you obviously have Nick Clegg appearing on your Shirley Williams lectures. Is this something you're going to touch bases with him?
Yeah, well, we're hoping so. We're hoping.
Anyone else want to talk about this on social media?
So I'll talk about the impacts on elections that Tom mentioned right at the end there. And the law as it currently stands is just woefully out of date for the way elections are currently fought. And we see it at local level. We certainly see it at national level. So the law's out of date in a number of different ways. Yes, in terms of the use of technology, in terms of online campaigning, but also it's out of date in the way that actually elections should be fought. So if you look at something really straightforward, like the way you can spend money, the amount you can spend in a parliamentary constituency is actually very small during the election campaign. £14,000, let's say. The amount you can spend on a national campaign is £3, £4, £5 million, depending on how many candidates you field. It's actually much higher than that. It's about 50, but it's massive. And so, but you have to concentrate that money talking about national issues or talking about your party leader. And so what that means is that campaigns are about who the candidate for prime minister is, because that's the way it has to be weighed with the funding, with the spending, rather than who your local candidate is. And then we're surprised when people say on the doorstep, oh, I'm voting for Jeremy Corbyn. And you go, well, he's standing in Islington North, so you're probably not actually. And people don't understand sometimes, probably that's because we've not done a good enough job explaining, that you vote for your local candidate, you vote for who your local MP is, and then all those MPs get together and decide, who's the biggest party in or coalition of parties, and therefore who's going to be the prime minister. So the law is woefully out of date and needs updating. And the way we campaign online just isn't covered sufficiently by the current regulations that are in place.
Right, no one else want to come in on this.
I was going to say it's amazing that Lisa found the one person that answered the door and said, "I'm voting for Jeremy Corbyn" at the last.
We didn't find that many in Liverpool. I think that again that's portrayed in a very negative way. As by far the oldest on this call, I'm quite excited that we can do new things and should be doing new things in new ways. I remember going out delivering the election address when we talked about standing in the Liberal interest or the Labour interest in wards. And I can remember the revolution when we brought in things like Focus and Mornings and things like that and really linked politics to marketing. And I think the cleverest of us will survive and thrive when we know how to ride the new horses of social media, do them fairly, do them responsibly. Let's not forget that all 6 of us on this call can be sued if we say the wrong things on social media. People know who we are, and they know in that context that we're worth suing. But I think the party's got a long way to go. We certainly have in Liverpool to actually work out how to use this new media effectively and properly.
I think actually, John, I think since February and since Caroline Flack's suicide, I think actually things have probably got worse rather than better. I think there was quite a sort of movement in the immediate aftermath of that, the sort of BeKind, hashtag BeKind. And I think the amount of time that people have spent sat in their own houses in front of their own computers and, on social media this year, because people have been bored, haven't they? And I think that actually the sort of, trials by social media and social media bullying and nastiness, I think actually has got worse. And I do think that we, as politicians, do have a responsibility and a mindfulness in that. I know we're going to come on later to Dominic Cummings and his behaviour, and Priti Patel and her behaviour as well. But I do think we need to be mindful when we launch personal attacks, back on those people, that, yes, they might have behaved in an entirely unacceptable way. And obviously, Caroline Flack at the time of her suicide, was part of an active trial. But I think we do need to be careful about the language and tone we use. And I think, we're certainly quite careful locally about, attacking Barnsley Labour, rather than sort of personal stuff. They generally are less respectful in reverse, but I've got a thick skin. But I do think we have a responsibility in terms of the messages that we're putting out and how easy it is now for those to be amplified and spread and twisted as well, to some extent. And that was what I mean. The situation around Caroline, wasn't new. It's happened to lots of people in the public eye in the past, but things spread so fast now that I think I do think we have a responsibility in terms of how we frame our attack messages, particularly where it's individuals that are on the receiving end of that.
And I suppose advice to all Lib Dem campaigners out there: if it's okay to take a break from social media, it is absolutely okay to block people, and just don't feed the trolls. Yeah. If someone is just going to be on you, just don't do it. And we are very fortunate. We had a councillor here in Preston who's come out as trans, and they have had some horrendous transphobic abuse put at them. And I was speaking to them, and they said, what should I do about this? I said, don't engage. Don't engage with those people. Don't engage with the Labour cabinet members trying to goad you. Don't engage with anybody. Just, you're doing the right thing. Concentrate on you and feel happy in the fact that you are doing the right thing and you're making a difference. And I think that's what people should get from this, is that social media is a wonderful tool. in the right hands. And if it ever becomes not, it's okay just to ignore those that are giving you grief. We move on to March. Okay, so March is, we have to get on to COVID. Oh, Lisa, what's to come in?
You would like to think I know what I'm talking about sometimes, and indeed I do not. So the amount the Tories spent on the 2019 general election was £16.5 million. So they spent the most out of any of the parties. So just to put on record that was the amount they spent.